Sometimes, the weight of loneliness became unbearable. It wasn't just about being alone in a room. It was like I was trapped inside myself, unable to break free. I could feel the emptiness growing, as if something was slowly draining away every piece of who I used to be, and each day I sank deeper. What people saw on the outside, the student, the content creator, the young adult trying to carve out some independence, was so far from the chaos swirling inside me. Waking up every day felt like a burden, with a constant voice whispering that nothing I did would ever be enough. The truth is, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep going.
I'm Rachel Harper. Today, I'm sharing a story that highlights the deep struggles many face behind closed doors. This story is based on real events, but some names and details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. If this story resonates with you, please consider sharing, liking, and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Now let's get into today's story.
My name is Daniel, I'm 28, and I work as a digital content creator focused on lifestyle and mental health. My life has always been a mix of appearances and introspection. To others, I come across as charismatic, in control, someone who tries to maintain an optimistic public image. But those who know me well understand that I'm more reserved, especially when it comes to my emotions. I grew up in a conservative, deeply religious family in Eastern Europe. There, emotional support and vulnerability weren't encouraged. From a young age, I learned to swallow my problems, internalize trauma and conflict. That's how I developed this detached stance towards myself. I got used to never showing weakness. Depression entered my life when I was 17, right around the time I left home to try and live independently. It all started with family conflict, especially after I came out. My father, who had always been distant, didn't accept my sexual orientation. That only deepened the rift between us, and I ended up moving in with my older brother. But that change, which was supposed to bring me freedom, also brought a deep sense of loneliness. At that moment, I found myself entering a new phase of life, starting university, with no emotional support system. The pressure to adapt to this new environment, along with academic responsibilities, quickly became overwhelming. I felt a growing emptiness, a sense of being completely alone, unable to manage the emotions that were flooding in. That's when depression became my constant companion. Early in college, I began to feel a despair I had never experienced before. It was as if life had lost its meaning. I didn't know how to deal with the storm of emotions inside me. The weight of loneliness, the disconnect from my family, and the academic pressure dragged me to a dark place where destructive thoughts started to take hold. That's when everything changed. At first, depression showed up as a constant feeling of emptiness. It was like I was drifting, without any real sense of purpose. Even though my responsibilities at university were pulling me back into reality, the things that used to bring me joy started to lose their spark, and a growing anxiety began to take over. Everything became harder, even something as simple as getting out of bed. I felt disconnected from everything, like I was just going through the motions of life without actually experiencing it. There was also this critical voice in my head that never let up. It questioned every decision I made, tore down my self-esteem, and made me feel incapable of meeting any expectations, especially my own. I'd look at my peers, and it seemed like everyone had their lives together, while I felt emotionally broken and inadequate. It was this constant sense of failure, of not being good enough to connect with people or even ask for help. That disconnection started to impact my daily life pretty quickly. The first thing to go was my attendance in class. I began skipping more often, isolating myself in my room. Taking care of myself stopped being a priority, and even simple tasks, like eating right or taking a shower, felt impossible. Slowly, I slipped into this cycle of apathy and procrastination, where nothing seemed to matter anymore. My part-time job, which I'd relied on to help cover college expenses, started to unravel too. At first, I was seen as dependable and hardworking, but over time, My lateness and absences became more noticeable. My supervisor picked up on the changes, and I began to lose control over this small source of stability. Lucas, my roommate, had tried to reach out to me in the beginning, but even he started to distance himself. He respected my space, but he didn't really understand what I was going through. Our interactions became more infrequent, and isolating myself felt like the only way I could cope with the constant weight of my emotions. People around me started to notice that something wasn't right. My classmates saw that I stopped participating in group activities, and our conversations became more distant. My family wasn't really involved during this time, except for my older brother, who tried to stay in touch through texts. I'd respond briefly, trying to hide what I was really going through, because I didn't want to worry him. I also believed that there was nothing he could do to help me anyway. And so, the emotional isolation grew. Even though I was surrounded by people, the loneliness only deepened. I couldn't connect with anyone, and depression slowly pulled me further into its grip. The first major breakdown I remember happened during my second semester of college. I was approaching final deadlines, and with each passing day, the pressure to finish assignments and study for exams mounted. I felt completely paralyzed, like I was stuck in a cycle of inevitable failure. No matter how hard I tried, it felt like I was sinking into a bottomless pit. In those moments, the darkest thoughts would surface. I felt useless, incapable, and the idea that I'd never escape this situation consumed me. During one of these crises, I spent 3 entire days locked in my room. I didn't eat, didn't shower, and ignored every message from friends and classmates. I didn't have the strength to face anyone, let alone explain what was happening. The sense of disconnection from reality was so intense that I could barely tell what was real and what was just the chaos in my mind. One of the worst situations happened when I simply couldn't show up for a group presentation. The weight of failing in front of others, the certainty that I wouldn't be able to speak or even think clearly, kept me from going. My group members were frustrated, and that only fed into my guilt. It was an overwhelming feeling, like I was sinking deeper and deeper inside myself. The anxiety was so intense that my body physically reacted. I felt nauseous, had heart palpitations, and an uncontrollable urge to just disappear. Another critical moment happened at work. I had a part-time job to help cover college expenses, but for weeks, I couldn't bring myself to go in. Each day that passed, the thought of facing people, of being confronted for missing shifts, terrified me. Eventually, I lost the job, which only made things worse. The sense of helplessness and hopelessness deepened, and I realized I was losing control of every part of my life. At first, I had no idea how to handle these crises. My immediate reaction was to run from everything. I'd lock myself in my room, avoid all responsibilities, and sink into a cycle of procrastination and self-blame that only made things worse. To numb the pain, I'd distract myself by watching videos or scrolling through social media for hours. But nothing really eased that crushing emptiness. There were times when the frustration and anger were so overwhelming that I thought about self-harm as a way to relieve the pain. But I didn't act on it in those early months. I felt lost, unable to ask for help, convinced that I was weak for not being able to handle everything on my own. I clearly remember the moment I realized I needed help. It was my second year of college, and things had become unbearable. The exhaustion, both physical and mental, was consuming me in a way I'd never experienced before. Waking up each morning felt like an impossible task, and no matter how long I slept, the fatigue lingered. The anxiety and fear of failure paralyzed me. I had no strength left to keep going, and the idea of giving up on everything, school, my independence, started to feel more real. I remember one night in particular when the destructive thoughts became stronger. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed for hours, tossing and turning, trying to find some relief, but the thoughts wouldn't stop. For the first time, I was scared of myself, scared of what I might do. In that moment, at the peak of my desperation, something clicked inside me. I knew that if I kept going like this, something terrible could happen. By morning, exhausted and hopeless, I realized I couldn't handle it alone anymore. Deciding to ask for help, though, was a battle in itself. There was this stigma I carried about therapy and medication. I grew up believing that talking about your feelings was a sign of weakness, something only weak people did. There was also the fear of judgment. What would my classmates think if they knew I was seeing a therapist? This internal resistance consumed me, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't go on like this. The first step was opening up to Sophie, a classmate I'd gotten close to over the past few months. We had gradually become friends, and she was one of the few people who noticed my absences and withdrawn behavior. When I finally admitted to her that I was struggling to cope with the pressure, she was the first person to encourage me to seek professional help. Sophie mentioned the university's counseling services again, something she'd brought up before, but I had ignored it. Even with Sophie's encouragement, it took me weeks to work up the courage to schedule that first session. The thought of sitting in front of a stranger and exposing all my vulnerabilities terrified me. I was also afraid of medication. Hearing Sophie talk about it as a possibility made me even more resistant. The idea of losing control of myself scared me, as if I hadn't already lost most of it. Still, after yet another crisis that left me paralyzed for days, I realized I had no other choice. I had to try. That first therapy session was one of the hardest moments of my life. I sat there, across from the therapist, feeling like I was about to fall apart. At first, I could barely speak. Everything I was feeling was trapped inside me, like the words just couldn't come out. The shame of being there, of reaching this point, was overwhelming. But as the session went on, something started to shift. For the first time, I felt a slight relief from sharing my pain with someone who wasn't there to judge me, but to listen. In the weeks that followed, therapy started to help me see the self-destructive patterns that were feeding my depression. The isolation, the relentless self-criticism, the inability to ask for help. The therapist helped me understand that I wasn't failing by needing help, and that seeking support was actually an act of courage. When I finally accepted trying medication, with the help of Dr. Martineau, the psychiatrist who began working with me, my recovery took another step forward. At first, it was hard to accept the idea of relying on something to feel normal, but I gradually realized that medication was just a tool to help stabilize my mood and give me the energy I needed to face each day. It wasn't a quick fix, and it wasn't magic, but it was the first sign that things could get better, that there was a way out. When I began to recover, I realized the road ahead was going to be long and filled with challenges. What helped me the most at first was creating a routine. As difficult as it was, having set times to wake up, eat, and even take short walks outside gave me a sense of control. Before, everything felt chaotic, and that routine, even though it was simple, started to create a foundation of stability. One of the most effective tools was practicing mindfulness, something my therapist suggested early on. At first, I admit I didn't believe in it much. Meditating, deep breathing, it seemed pointless given the weight of what I was dealing with. But slowly, those moments of pause and reconnection with myself started to have an effect. It became a way to disconnect, even if just for a few minutes, from the relentless negative thoughts. Learning to accept my feelings without judgment was one of the most valuable lessons of the process. I had always internalized my problems, and I was finally learning to deal with them in a kinder way toward myself. Another turning point in my recovery was recognizing the small wins. There was a day when I managed to complete a full week of classes without missing a single one. That might seem insignificant to most people, but for me, it was a huge victory. That small milestone gave me hope that I could regain control of my life. Getting back to studying, being able to complete the simplest tasks, each achievement, no matter how small, helped shift my perspective on depression. Emotional support played a key role too. Sophie was by my side throughout the process, always there to listen without judgment. Having that support system was crucial because it made me feel less isolated. And my psychiatrist, Dr. Martineau, took the time to explain that depression wasn't a weakness, but a treatable condition. Those conversations, along with therapy sessions, gave me the strength to keep going. Group therapy was also a game changer. At first, I resisted the idea of opening up to strangers, but hearing the stories of others going through similar struggles made me feel less alone. I realized there was a space where I could share my victories and frustrations without fear of being judged. Over time, I began exploring other forms of expression. I joined an art therapy activity where painting and drawing helped me process emotions I couldn't put into words. Surprisingly, this practice brought me relief and became a lighter way of dealing with what I was feeling. Writing, something I had abandoned, also became a part of my life again. Getting back into this hobby was freeing, and it allowed me to organize my thoughts in a creative way. Slowly, I started to feel like I was finally finding some relief. One of my first major victories came when I decided to return to the cafe where I had worked before getting fired during one of my worst crises. It wasn't about asking for my job back, but about facing that place filled with difficult memories. The anxiety before going was almost unbearable. I feared that stepping into that environment would reignite all the feelings of failure and guilt that had haunted me. But still, something inside me knew that in order to move forward, I had to confront that fear. When I walked in, I was surprised by how my former coworkers reacted. Instead of judgment, I was met with smiles and warmth. In that moment, I realized just how far I'd come. The weight of guilt that used to paralyze me was no longer there. That small visit became a significant milestone in my emotional recovery. Small victories started to happen more often in little ways. One simple but deeply meaningful example was the day. After an especially hard week, I decided to go for a walk at sunset. For months, just stepping outside had felt impossible. But on that afternoon, something shifted. As I walked, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. The golden sunlight, the soft sound of the wind in the trees. These small details I had ignored for so long now felt like an indescribable comfort. It was as if, in that moment, I was reconnecting with life. These gestures, no matter how small, began to show me that recovery wasn't some giant leap, but a series of small steps. Every day that I managed to face something that had once paralyzed me, whether it was going outside, meeting up with someone, or returning to an old activity, was a victory that I learned to celebrate. These moments didn't erase the depression, but they gave me the certainty that I was truly making progress. The realization that I was getting better came slowly. The crises didn't disappear all at once, but they started happening less frequently. The negative thoughts still came, but they didn't carry the same paralyzing weight as before. I began to handle them with more calm and clarity. One important milestone was when I decided to return to my digital content channel, something I had abandoned for months. I recorded several versions of a video where I talked about my experience with depression, but out of insecurity, I deleted them all. Until one day, I decided it was time to put myself out there, despite the fear. I posted the video, and to my surprise, I received positive feedback from followers who were going through similar situations. That moment gave me a new sense of purpose, to use my experience to help others. Reflecting on these moments of victory, I realized they were much more than small achievements. They represented my ability to keep going, to rise back up even after the darkest times. My journey with depression stopped feeling like a losing battle and became an opportunity for personal growth. I recognized that, while there were still challenges ahead, I was stronger and more prepared to face them. There was also a significant event when I was invited to speak at a small talk organized by the therapy group I was a part of. My first reaction was to hesitate. Sharing my struggles with an audience seemed terrifying. but with encouragement from Carla and Sophie, who reminded me how much my story could inspire others, I accepted the invitation. Speaking openly about my victories and challenges was a deeply vulnerable moment, but also one of tremendous personal growth. I never would have imagined doing something like that just months earlier, and realizing the positive impact my words had on others' lives was, without a doubt, one of the greatest accomplishments of my journey. These moments, both big and small, have shaped my understanding of life and my battle with depression. They've shown me that progress is real, even when it's slow, and that every victory, no matter how small, is a step toward recovery. Today, when I look at my life, I see things differently. Depression and anxiety are still part of my daily reality, but I no longer fear losing control the way I used to. I've learned that these ups and downs are part of the process, and even on the hardest days, I know there are ways to find my balance again. What once felt like an impossible battle is now something I can face with more confidence. One of the biggest changes I notice in myself is my sense of empathy. I've become kinder to myself and to others. I used to carry this fierce self-criticism, but throughout this journey, I've learned the importance of opening up to people like Sophie and Carla, who were crucial in my recovery. The support from professionals like Dr. Martineau and my therapist helped me realize that I don't have to face everything alone. Today, I deeply value those connections, and I know that letting others into my life is essential to my well-being. Of course, there are still difficult days, but the difference is that now I no longer feel powerless. I've learned to recognize the signs of a relapse before it takes over. The tools I've developed, therapy, medication, and self-care practices, give me the strength to handle these moments with more clarity. Mindfulness continues to be one of my greatest allies, helping me reconnect with the present and break free from negative thought patterns. I've also learned to embrace rest, writing, and painting as ways to channel my emotions. Things I once saw as weakness, but now understand as self-care. The message I want to share with anyone struggling with depression is that asking for help is an act of courage, not weakness. I understand how terrifying it can be to take that first step, but it's necessary. Depression makes us feel isolated, like we're fighting alone, but the truth is, there are many people facing similar battles. You don't have to go through it alone. There is always someone willing to listen and walk alongside you. As I often say, no matter how dark the storm may seem, it will pass. It's a long journey, but one that's worth it. Finding support and taking small steps are ways to start seeing that, even in the midst of chaos, peace is possible. Recently, I found a new sense of purpose through a cause that's close to my heart. I now volunteer with an organization that offers support to young people facing emotional crises. Sharing my story, whether in talks or through videos, has been a way to help others, but it's also become part of my own healing. Every time I speak about my struggles and victories, I'm reminded that even with the challenges, I'm still moving forward. This is my new perspective. The battle may continue, but I'm better equipped to face it now, and I want to help others find their own path to healing. Looking back, I realized that my journey with depression has been one of the most painful, yet also one of the most transformative experiences of my life. It forced me to face my deepest fears and vulnerabilities, things I would never have confronted if I hadn't reached that breaking point. Depression taught me so much about resilience and empathy, not just for others, but for myself. More than anything, it showed me the importance of self-care, of allowing myself to feel, and most importantly, of asking for help when I need it. I've learned that living with depression doesn't mean being defined by it. There were times when I felt weak, like I couldn't go on. But those moments don't define who I am. I've learned to forgive myself for those setbacks, and to appreciate every small step I've taken toward recovery. If there's one thing this journey has shown me, it's that I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. But also that I don't have to be strong all the time. And that's okay. I now understand that the fight against depression doesn't have a finish line. I still have tough days, but I've learned the importance of continuing to seek help and to be open to moments of joy. no matter how small they are. Simple things, like a walk in the park or a conversation with friends, hold immense value. They help me stay connected to life, even on the hardest days. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that happiness doesn't have to be constant to be meaningful. You can have bad days and still be moving forward. The key is to keep going, even if your steps are small. Along the way, I've started to find beauty and joy in the simple things, the ones we often overlook. If I could leave one final message for anyone struggling with depression, it would be this: never underestimate your ability to grow, to change, and to heal. No matter how difficult the journey may be, life still has so much to offer. Don't be afraid to seek help, to be vulnerable, and to open up to others. You're not alone. There's always someone ready to listen and support you. Believe in yourself, even on the darkest days. The light will come, even if it takes time. For me, sharing this journey has been part of my healing process. Whether through videos, speaking engagements, or casual conversations, telling my story reminds me of how far I've come, and it gives me the chance to help others going through similar struggles. And through these connections, I continue to reconnect with life in ways I never thought possible before. The journey goes on, but now I know I'm not alone, and that with the right tools, it's possible to live a full life, even after the darkest moments. With all my gratitude, Daniel.
Now that we've reached the end of Daniel's inspiring story, his words remind us of the strength that can be found even in the darkest moments. The journey against depression is filled with challenges, but every small step toward healing is a significant victory. If you've ever felt lost or alone, know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Depression can seem like an endless battle, but small steps can lead to healing. Sharing my story has been a way to find strength, and now I invite you to be a part of this recovery journey. Please share your thoughts or your own story in the comments. Here, we all have a voice, and no one has to fight alone. This space is meant to welcome, support, and remind us that asking for help is an act of courage. If you know someone who is also facing these challenges, share this video, like it, and subscribe to the channel to keep following stories of resilience and inspiration. Together, we can create a supportive community where every step, no matter how small, is a victory.